The Toccata and Fugue in D minor, BWV 565, is a piece of organ music written, according to its oldest extant sources, by Johann Sebastian Bach. Its time of origin, narrowed down depending on author, lies between c. 1704 and the 1750s. The piece opens with a toccata section, followed by a fugue that ends in a coda. To a large extent the piece complies to the characteristics deemed typical for the North German organ school of the Baroque era, but divergent stylistic influences, such as South German characteristics, have been described in scholarly literature on the piece. For a century after its creation, the only certainty about this toccata and fugue is that it survived in a manuscript written by Johannes Ring. The first publication of the piece, in the Bach revival era, was in 1833, through the efforts of Felix Mendelssohn, who also performed the piece in an acclaimed concert in 1840. The piece knew a fairly successful piano version by Carl Tausig in the second half of the 19th century, but it was not until the 20th century that its popularity rose above that of other organ compositions by Bach. The popularity further expanded, for instance by its inclusion in Walt Disney's Fantasia, until the Toccata and Fugue in D minor came to be considered as the most famous work in the organ repertoire. A wide, and often conflicting, variety of analyses has been published about the piece. For instance, in literature on organ music it is often described as some sort of program music depicting a storm, while in the context of Disney's Fantasia it was promoted as absolute music, nothing like program music depicting a storm. In the last quarter of the 20th century, scholars like Peter Williams and Rolf Dietrich Klaus published the studies on the piece, and argued against its authenticity. Bach scholars like Christoph Wolff defended the attribution to Bach. Other commentators ignored the authenticity doubts or considered the attribution issue undecided. No edition of the Bach work of Signes listed the Toccata and Fugue among the doubtful works, nor does its entry on the website of the Bach Archive Leipzig even mention alternative views on the attribution issue. History. The only extant near-contemporary source for BWV 565 is an undated copy by Johannes Ring. A broad estimate is that the manuscript was written somewhere in the period from 10 years before Bach's death in 1750 to 10 years after it. Ring produced his first copy of a Bach score in 1730 when he was 12. The evolution of Ring's handwriting lets assume that his copy of BWV 565 was written soon after his first copy of a Bach composition, which would narrow the date of his BWV 565 manuscript to between 1730 and 1735, when Ring was around 15. At the time Ring was a student of former Bach student Johann Peter Kellner at Grafenrode, and probably faithfully copied what his teacher put before him. There are some errors in the score, such as note values not adding up to fill a measure correctly. Such defects show a carelessness deemed typical for Kellner, who left over 60 copies of works by Bach. The title page of Ring's manuscript writes the title of the work in Italian as Toccata con Fugue, names Johann Sebastian Bach as the composer of the piece, and indicates its tonality as X.D', which is usually seen as the key signature being D minor. However, in Ring's manuscript the staves have no flat accidental at the key. In this sense, in Ring's manuscript, the piece is written down in D Dorian mode. Another piece listed as Bach's was also known as Toccata and Fugue in D minor, and was equally entitled to the Dorian qualification. It was that piece, BWV 538, that received the Dorian nickname, that qualifier being effectively used to distinguish it from BWV 565. Most score editions of BWV 565 use the D minor key signature. Unlike Rinck's manuscript, Rinck's manuscript does not use a separate stave for the pedal part, which was common in the 18th century. Printed editions of the BWV 565 organ score invariably write the pedal line on a separate stave. In Rinck's manuscript, the upper stave is written down using the soprano clef, where printed editions use the treble clef. All other extant manuscript copies of the score date from at least several decades later. Some of these, written in the 19th century, are related with each other in that they have similar solutions to the defects in the Rinck manuscript. Whether these derive from an earlier manuscript independent from Rinck's is debated by scholars. These near-identical 19th-century copies, the version Felix Mendelssohn knew, use the treble clef and a separate stave for the pedal. In general, the later copies show a less excessive use of fermatas in the opening measures and are more correct in making the note values fit the measures, but that may as well be from polishing a defective sources from deriving from a cleaner earlier source. In the later copies the work is named, for instance, Adagio and Fugue or Toccata for the work as a whole. The name Toccata is most probably a later addition, similar to the title of Toccata, Adagio and Fugue, BWV 564, because in the Baroque era such organ pieces would most commonly be called simply prelude, a prelude and fugue. Rinck's copy abounds in Italian tempo markings, fermatas and staccato dots, all very unusual features for pre-1740 German music. German organ schools are distinguished into North German and South German. The composition has stylistic characteristics from both schools. The stylus fantasticus and other North German characteristics are most apparent. However, the numerous recitative stretches are rarely found in the works of northern composers and may have been inspired by Johann Heinrich Bachstadt, a pupil of Pachelbel, whose few surviving free works, particularly his Prelude and Capriccio in D minor, exhibit similar features. A passage in the fugue of BWV 565 is an exact copy of a phrase in one of Johann Pachelbel's D minor fantasias, and the first half of the subject is based on this Pachelbel passage as well. At the time it was however common practice to create fugues on other composers' themes. Structure. BWV 565 exhibits a typical simplified North German structure with a free opening, a fugal section, and a short free closing section. Toccata. The toccata begins with a single voice flourish in the upper ranges of the keyboard, doubled at the octave. It then spirals toward the bottom, where a diminished seventh chord appears, built one note at a time. This resolves into a D major chord. Three short passages follow, each reiterating a short motif and doubled at the octave. The section ends with a diminished seventh chord which resolved into the tonic D minor through a flourish. The second section of the toccata is a number of loosely connected figurations and flourishes. The pedal switches to the dominant key, A minor. This section segs into the third and final section of the toccata, which consists almost entirely of a passage doubled at the sixth and comprising reiterations of the same three-note figure, similar to doubled passages in the first section. After a brief pedal flourish, the piece ends with a D minor chord. Fugue. The subject of the four-voice fugue is made up entirely of 16th notes, with an implied pedal point set against a brief melodic subject that first falls, then rises. Such violinistic figures are frequently encountered in Baroque music and that of Bach, both as fugue subjects and his material in non-imitative pieces. Unusually, the answer is in the subdominant key, rather than the traditional dominant. Although technically a four-part fugue, most of the time there are only three voices, and some of the interludes are in two, or even one voice. Although only simple triadic harmony is employed throughout the fugue, there is an unexpected C minor subject entry, and furthermore, a solo pedal statement of the subject, a unique feature for a Baroque fugue. Immediately after the final subject entry, the fugue resolves to a sustained B-flat major chord. Coda. A multi-sectional coda follows marked recitativo. Although only 17 bars long, it progresses through 5 tempo changes. The last bars are played molto adagio, and the piece ends with a minor plagal cadence. Performance. The performance time of the piece is usually around 9 minutes, but shorter performance times and execution times of over 10:30 exist. The first section of the piece, the toccata, takes somewhat less than a third of the total performance time. As was common practice for German music of the 17th century, the intended registration is not specified, and performers' choices vary from simple solutions such as organo pleno to exceedingly complex ones, like those described by Harvey Grace.